Okay, welcome back to the Black Carnivore podcast. I am really excited to bring Michelle Hurn back to us today. She's going to be talking about her new book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. And I've read it and I think it's fantastic, and I couldn't, give it higher kudos. So I definitely encourage you to go out, get a copy, and read it, and use that to spark your new keto carnivore lifestyle. And today, before we talked about her story, how she got into carnivore, interested in thinking about any of this, altogether. But today, I kind of really wanted to dig into the book and go through some of the themes that were particularly poignant to me, and hopefully, you will find that of interest as well. All right. For the first thing, I'd love to just get your picture, on this. How do you situate your book? Like, why should someone read your book? What, how will they be helped by this approach, or what things are helped by this approach?
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that, because there are so many different nutrition and diet books out there. So I've had people ask me well, why is your book different? And so, it's called The Dietitian's Dilemma, but it's pretty much not only healthcare providers' dilemmas, but it's everybody's dilemma. The book starts out just by saying, what would you do if your health was transformed, doing the opposite of everything you were taught? We're taught we need all these whole grains, all these fruits and vegetables, that we have to have lots of carbohydrates, that they're essential. And so my book really goes through and kind of breaks down a lot of nutrition myths. There are 5 conditions in the book that I felt like I could specifically speak really well to. And they're things that are just, chronic illnesses that I think a lot of people either probably have themselves, or they know somebody they love has them, and those include things like obesity and diabetes, mental health disorders, including major depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, eating disorders, which is a really controversial topic to, recommend, or even to start thinking about a low carb animal-based diet for conditions like that. Sarcopenia, which is muscle wasting, heart failure. And if anybody's interested in where the nutrition guidelines actually came from, I have a whole chapter on that. So, one thing that I've been told is a little unique about my book is I include a lot of stories and a lot of testimonies. And I'm so grateful to have your personal testimony, because I think we learn through our stories. I didn't just want to throw a bunch of information at people, because the one that's not very exciting or interesting. But I think I want, when you read this book, it's my hope that you can connect, you can understand the information, and then it can get you just kind of excited to change, because change is possible. I always say the body has a tremendous capacity to heal physically, mentally, emotionally, when we provide it with the right nutrition. I've had a lot of people ask me too, just about my running. I'm an ultra runner, so I have a chapter about that. I also share very intimately about my own personal story, struggling with an eating disorder. My mom was bipolar growing up. What was that like? And then, kind of what my life is like now. So, I think when we share authentically, honestly, being vulnerable, I think that really helps us connect. And, it was my goal to be, like I said, to be honest, to be brave, to get the information out there, but also for people who are skeptical or well, show me the science. There's 180 clinical trials and 25 testimonies. So I really hope people find it interesting and inspiring, and, it gets you what you're looking for.
Well, I actually really appreciated your telling your whole story in the book. I mean, I've definitely heard pieces of your story before, but didn't realize, some of the most important parts of it. I mean, for example, your mother struggles with her mental health and with her food. I mean, that, really kind of made it clear, where some of your issues came from. Although I find it interesting, did your sisters also struggle with eating disorders, or did their, maladaptations, I suppose, come out?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. None of my sisters have a diagnosed full-blown eating disorder, but certainly anxiety, certainly a lot of, issues around food, and some probably more disordered eating type of things. So yeah, we all definitely had had to learn how to cope and relearn some of those patterns that we, grew up learning as kids, for sure.
Yeah. And hearing, all that you went through, I mean, like, oh my God, like fractured hip and all of those things really, well, one, it really highlights how important running was to you or is to you. And two, I think it really brings out the most important thing about getting your diet dialed in. I think so many people hyper focus on counting everything and getting everything and doing all the right things. But the whole purpose of like eating this way is so that we get better, so that we can do the thing that we really love. And yeah, so your being able to do this has focused you and has given you the healing necessary to be able to go back to running. And like from the most recent things I've heard from you, you're doing well enough to potentially, compete in a way that you never would have imagined possible, or that you thought was over at, after, was it your freshman year of college or? Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely, when I fractured, I had a hip fracture in high school and then another really serious hip fracture in college, all left over from, just poor bone density from having a serious eating disorder. And, I took me a while before I was able to start running again. And I really wanted to qualify for the Olympic trials and the marathon and put so much into that. And, as it talks about in the book, just my running kind of fell off a cliff in 2019. Like from so many years of consuming so many processed carbohydrates and stress and some not of the best coping mechanisms, I just didn't think I was going to be able to run anymore. Like I was having pain and spasms. I couldn't sleep. And, it was kind of a pivotal moment I talk about in the book that I just decided like, this is too much. I'm done. Mm-hmm. So why not try an animal-based way of eating? I mean, it was kind of like, I just wanted my muscle pain to stop. And, what happened was beyond my wildest expectations. Not only did my muscle pain decrease, my lifelong anxiety got to the point, so much better, to the point that, my wife pointed out, like, wow, this is the best your anxiety's been in the 11 years I've known you. And I was able to start running again. And I just at first thought like, well, maybe I'll be able to run recreationally. Like, can you even really run on a low carb diet? And of course, I discovered Zach Bitter, who follows a low carb diet and is a elite ultra runner. And then I just started to dream again. Maybe that's the most beautiful thing about this way of eating, this, the low carb, high fat, animal based way of eating, is it gave me my life back. I would go for runs and I would, finish, and I would start to picture myself crossing the finish line, and I'd throw my arms up and be like, yeah, and of course our neighbors were like, oh, this girl's strange. It's all quiet, I have my headphones, I'm screaming as I'm running by our house. And I just started to dream, like, could I run an ultra marathon? And an ultra marathon is anything greater than 26 miles. And it just sounded so crazy. I went from not being able to run to dreaming of running more than an ultra marathon. But I just, and this is what I would encourage anybody else to do, is just, I was curious. I was excited. I dug into the research. Like, I was just shocked that there's so many, clinical trials on the benefits of this way of eating and the bioavailability of animal-based nutrition. And I was like, maybe I can be an example. What if I fuel my body with this animal-based way? Like, let's just see what happens. And, as on November 7th, I ran my first ultra marathon, and it was kind of funny. We got out to the course, and it was actually a cool day. It was cooler than we thought the temperature was going to be. So I was really excited, but there was 22-mile-an-hour winds. So I was like, oh no. Whoa. And it's a loop course. So half the way it was great. The other half, it was awful. But I won the race. I ran 44.63 miles in 6 hours. And my next race is June 12th. And we're going to try to run 12 hours. So I will be running from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Yeah. Which, just even saying that still sounds a little holy cow. But I mean, and I feel like in life, I've said this before, like, all I want to do is two things. I want to chase my passion, which is long distance running, and I want to help others, and that's why I wrote this book, because I believe that so many people are hurting, and I believe there's a relatively simple solution that we've just massively overcomplicated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that should honestly be the subtitle of your book and all of our books on carnivore. Get your life back, because
Yeah.
that's the most important thing that's happening here. And we might be we just might be getting too focused on the wrong things. But having your body health, your brain health, your strength, and your mood and everything all dialed in, that just makes it easy to deal with, and not only just deal with life, but like thrive and actually contribute to the world, contribute something awesome to the world.
I totally agree. Yeah, I'm very concerned that, in our society, people aren't even functioning on like a level baseline anymore. It's like people are functioning even below status. People aren't able to cope with just basic amounts of stress. People aren't able to do basic tasks. For some people, just walking several steps is too much because of medical conditions, or like being able to cope with normal life stress is too much because of psychological conditions. So getting your life back, and you certainly don't have to want to run a marathon. You don't even have to want to run at all, but just I can't describe how grateful and how happy I am just to live, just to and show up in the world, be present for conversations, feel good about my body, feel strong, not be in pain. Like, it's just a really, really awesome thing.
So I love the analogy of setting your house on fire and then, using like a chemical extinguisher to put it out. So I really like that. That gets at the idea of, the danger of consuming carbs. So can you tell me more about the danger of consuming carbs? And especially when your insulin is high, but before you've been diagnosed with diabetes. I feel like people kind of, they feel okay, until they get to, well, pre-diabetes, and they're like, well, it's still pre-diabetes, but really, like, damage has been happening all this time and before. So can you
Yeah.
just tell me more about that?
Yeah. And I was thinking about this earlier, and I just feel like we do such a poor job, as dietitians. And I was reading an article by a dietitian, and she said, well, I want to make it clear that carbohydrates are very important and essential. And she even used the word essential. And I got so angry because carbohydrates are the only non-essential macronutrient. And what that means is you do not need any carbohydrates to live, to thrive, to survive. And I've said before, I'm not anti-carbohydrate. I think using them strategically, intelligently. There are certainly there are instances, certainly as a long distance runner, I use carbohydrates strategically, but unfortunately, most people use carbohydrates as the base of their nutrition. They eat so many carbohydrates. And so what's happening in the body over time, there's several things that are happening. When you consume carbohydrates, you get a blood sugar response. Your blood sugar increases, insulin comes in and shuttles the sugar out of the blood. But over time, what happens, I also have that image of the hoarder's house. Over time, what happens is you just have too much blood sugar, and there's nowhere for it to go. Think of the hoarder's house. There's no more room at the end. There's stuff everywhere. And what our current nutrition standard of practices for treating, diabetes is to give you more carbohydrates and then dose you with insulin. That doesn't make any sense at all. If you're pre-diabetic, if you're metabolically unhealthy, and statistically 88% of the United States has some type of metabolic issue, and most of it certainly is the high blood sugar, pre-diabetes. So 88% of people, when they eat carbohydrates and their blood sugar goes up, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to have high blood sugar over time. We know, every 7 seconds, someone in the United States dies of complications of diabetes. Diabetes causes more deaths than many cancerous tumors. It's very, very dangerous. I've seen in the hospital setting people lose legs, hands, fingers, go blind, kidney failure, all this stuff. But anyway, just to complete that analogy, if you have diabetes, you have too much blood sugar, you have too much stored carbohydrates. Why in the world would you take in more carbohydrates? It's like literally your house is on fire. Your body is your house. You're inflamed. What makes sense to do? You need to put the fire out. You need to get rid of some of the stored carbohydrates. How do you do that? You need to do some light exercise is great, go for a walk, and you need to stop eating carbohydrates. The body will start to utilize and break down and get rid of the carbohydrate stores when you stop taking them in. We have clinical trials that people were able to get off 150 units of insulin in 8 days. People were able to reverse their diabetes in weeks a day. Weeks. I've seen people with diabetes for 20 years. And we can literally get you off diet, we can get you off insulin and reverse your diabetes in weeks. Why in the world are we still, why is it the standard of practice to tell someone to continue to consume carbs and give you insulin? Let's throw more fire on that house, and then we're going to use the fire extinguisher insulin to set it out. It's the most ridiculous backward system that it really makes me.
What is the damage that's going on in your body, though, before you're diagnosed with diabetes, when you have too much sugar or when you're taking in a lot of sugar? Like, I always want to tell people, hey, you should be concerned, and sugars, and carbohydrates can cause damage, but they're like, well, I don't have diabetes, so, it's not a problem. Yeah. And I'm next gonna, after a bunch of questions, I'm gonna come back around to the mental illness chapter, because that was just absolutely fascinating. But like physically in the body, like, what's happening with your blood cells? I mean, I always hear about diabetics like going blind, and why are there certain parts of the body that seem to be vulnerable?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question.
In those decades before you actually get diagnosed.
Yeah. And I unfortunately, if every time we ate like carbohydrates, if something really dramatic happened, we'd stop. We're such a quick fix society. We want to fix it this second. So if we don't feel a negative ramification right away, we're like, well, it's totally fine. When in reality, what's happening is it's building up over time. And what's building up? So the body really wants to, in your bloodstream, the body is just fantastic. It will do everything it can to keep you healthy, to keep you alive. But when you have too much sugar in the blood, it actually shifts the pH of the blood. And when you shift the pH of the blood, your body, that is very dangerous. Your body wants to maintain its same pH as often as possible. That's what your body needs. And when you have too much glucose, it actually changes the pH of the body. It changes the pH of the blood. And that causes all kinds of issues in various tissues. I mean, it goes to the optic nerves, the nerves of your eye. I mean, it's specifically damaging to your nervous system. So, that's why we see blindness. That's why people lose feeling in their feet, the peripheral neuropathy. It's damaging those nerves. It's damaging the kidneys. We have lots of different, veins, arterioles that go through the kidneys. Heart disease, it's all connected. The heart is just another muscle. So you're damaging the arteries that go to the heart. And it all has to do with the, pH of the blood. It does not want to have high blood sugar. That's the reason why your body has really, really good mechanisms to get sugar out of the blood very quickly. And we were not meant to eat a lot of sugar, and think about throughout evolution, it was relatively rare for humans to get, as you read in the book, you could go for years, sometimes people their entire lives without any sugar. And certainly if you live somewhere closer to the equator, you might have, you might eat more tropical plants, but man, fruits and things were so much less, they were less dense in sugar, than the ones we have today. So it's just, it's one of those things that over time is going to, unfortunately, by the time you have prediabetes or diabetes, a lot of damage has already been done. And I'm not saying that to make someone feel bad or discourage you or shame you. I think as a medical system, we've just failed humanity. But I am saying that that's something to take very seriously and say, okay, I'm on my way to potentially having a lot of complications. And, the complications of diabetes are awful. I have seen more suffering and more really horrible things with diabetes probably than any other disease. So, yeah.
You definitely gave examples in the book, and I've certainly heard about people with wounds that won't heal, and that goes so deep as to the bone, and it just sounds so difficult.
Yeah.
But, I've heard people talk about like an alkaline diet or, stuff like that. And, I hadn't really given it much thought, but I guess, I guess people are sort of perhaps on the right track, but trying to get there the wrong way. But it just, I hadn't thought about, what pH the body is. Like, it seems like that's something the body does its utmost to make sure it's at the right level until everything falls apart and it absolutely just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, 100%.
So, I thought that the questions that encouraged people to ask as they were as they were reading the chapter and sort of thinking about diabetes was really helpful. And, I think a lot of people don't question, like you say, they don't question what we're told. But when kind of, just as you just put it, like if you're told to eat a certain number of carbs and then you need to inject a certain amount of insulin to bring it down, like why wouldn't you just cut out both those things?
Yeah,
Like,
I think the biggest issue with that is just there's so much fear mongering around carbs. People genuinely believe, doctors believe, dietitians believe, and this is a belief. This is not a fact. They believe that you need carbs. So of course I have to feed the diabetic carbs because I have to feed everybody carbs. But it's not fact. It's not true. And we have, like I said, plenty of research and clinical trials of showing that you don't need carbs. It's very healthy to not have carbs. So yeah, like you said in the book, I asked the questions like, well, what happens to that blood sugar? If you're diabetic, then you already have too much, your muscles are completely full of glucose, your liver's full of glucose, you eat carbohydrates and your blood sugar goes up. So you take insulin, your doctor gives you insulin. Well, what happens? Because some people, I've seen doctors and patients be like, oh yeah, I have my blood sugar under control, or patient has their blood sugar under control. But if you're diabetic and you're using insulin, that sugar has to go somewhere. It doesn't magically fly out of your body, and I know there are some medications now that can actually help you pee some of it out. But even some of that blood sugar is going to end up as fat, is going to be stored as fat. I mean, as humans, we have a virtually unlimited capacity to store fat. And that's why a lot of diabetics are using insulin are going to gain weight. And certainly, some people store more fat as visceral fat than others, and that's very dangerous. That's a fat around your organs can actually, contribute to heart failure and organ failure. So it's a really bad idea, in my opinion, if someone cannot tolerate carbohydrates, a type 2 diabetic, to feed them carbohydrates and to give them insulin, which is basically forcing them to store fat. And, I asked lots of dietitians I had worked with and people while I was writing the book, how many people have you helped get off, medications with this way of eating? And most people said nobody, no one, and I've been so fortunate to interview, Dr. Ben Bickman and Dr. Westman and Tony Hampton, Dr. Hampton, and they're able to get people off medications daily with the low carb diet. So, and like I said in the book, like I'm nobody's moral coach or mom, or if you want to eat carbohydrates and take insulin, that is your prerogative. But I think we need to talk to people about, one, the long-term consequences, like, hey, you're probably going to lose a leg in 10 years and you're probably going to be on dialysis, versus, hey, if you follow a low carb, high fat diet, you're not going to feel great for 1 or 2 weeks. And then you're going to have an amazing quality of life. So I want that to be an option. I think it's criminal that we don't discuss that as an option with people.
Well, I guess it's just really helpful to kind of try to break through just some of the thinking that people have around food and what is necessary. And so I appreciate that about the way that you write, that it really tries to get at some of these underlying beliefs that are driving this behavior. And I like that. I appreciate that, because I'm trying to do the same thing, and it's hard, especially when people really haven't been asked some of these critical logical questions. So often people are sort of situated in their belief, and so any questions are sort of met with a level of resistance, like you're like
Yeah.
questioning someone's like life values. And yeah.
Well, even things like fruits and vegetables and fiber, people have, when I worked in the hospital, a diabetic, they would get 90 grams of carbs, and I would go in there and they're like, oh, don't worry, I have grapes and I have a banana. And it's like, these things all break down to sugar. It doesn't matter if you're, eating a chocolate chip cookie, a plate of pasta, or an apple, they all break down to sugar. So it's just, we have these really erroneous beliefs, and there's just a belief that all plants are good all the time. And, oh, I have to have fiber, or how am I going to poop? You don't need any of those things. And once again, we've done a really, really poor job of teaching people what a human, I call it a species specific diet, what that actually looks like what foods can humans actually absorb nutrition from. And another thing that I just really frustrates me about the, dietetics community, and I guess I should also disclaim that there are some really awesome dietitians out there and doctors. There's some people that have reached out to me. There's a lot of people that are on this low carb that are for it, but just in my general experience in the hospital setting, and a lot of dietitians are still very, high carb, whatever. But the idea of carbohydrate addiction, the idea that you could literally be addicted in the same way that you could be to, alcohol or drugs, is really just kind of completely thrown away by the medical community. Like, of course, that doesn't exist, and you might joke about it, like, oh, I'm a chocoholic. Or that there is a lot of research that, for many people, carbohydrates elicit an addictive behavior. So here we have somebody who's diabetic, who's maybe depressed, who's overweight, and what they desperately need is nutrition. They're probably malnourished, which is another thing. A lot of people believe if you're overweight, you can't be malnourished, What they desperately need is to take away carbohydrates, to flood their system with highly absorbable nutrition, amino acids from meat, saturated fats, and, let their body reset. And what do we do in the hospital setting? We throw sugary drinks at them, juice, grapes, low-fat protein, and then just dose them with insulin. And we're wondering why they're not getting better. So I really tried to help people kind of think about what's going on in the body and brain, and then really try to come to their own conclusions. Like you said, I often ask, does this make sense? Is this the best way to do this?
And I loved how, your chapters are full of citations, so that, I can go look at these studies and be convinced by, the science as presented. So that was really helpful. I like that.
Thank you. I would tell anyone who's writing a book, make sure you cite as you go. I just put little parentheses around stuff. So I had to go back and, I said I would put the last name, but do the full citation. That literally was a whole month of extra work.
Oh yeah, totally. When I started doing my master's degree, I was the first time, my first draft, I didn't do that. And I was oh my God.
Is that a nightmare?
It was another 2 weeks of trying to go back through and figure out what I was reading. Oh yeah, yep. Never again. Yep. So yeah, that was super awesome. Yeah. But, what I love about the book, too, is that you intersperse all of these testimonials and, and so you can see real life people. I feel a lot of diet books, the last, the last 10 or 15 years have really started to kind of be very focused on science, which is helpful. And, you want to be able to read the studies, but, I don't think people are convinced by science. They're sort of convinced by their next door neighbor, their aunt, their friend, who ate this way and found success. So sometimes you just need to see people who are doing it and understand what happened.
Yeah, 100%. And I had so much education. Obviously, a lot of my education as a dietitian was erroneous, but what really helped change my path, was seeing people, seeing testimonies. It was you, one of the first people that reached out to me, and I just seeing your story. And I remember thinking wow, my health is not good and her health is good. What are you doing? Being able to actually see it in real life and to see people that are just, their health is good and they're happy and they're glowing. You're I want that. And that's one of the reasons that, I really wanted to put my story out there, because it's hard. It's hard talking about an eating disorder and, almost dying, and just a lot of the things I've been through are not pleasant. But I think when we share our truth, and when we have others, when we can see others making huge transformations, it just gives us hope. It gives us hope and permission to dream. And then people can reach out. People can like, wow, look, Day, she's in this book. I'm going to hit her up on Instagram, or, so I think that's really exciting. And I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so, I do encourage for everybody who's watching to, definitely check out this book, because it really is very personable, and it's really helpful to see all the different ways that carnivore improves people's lives. I mean, and it's not just in weight loss, which I think is what a lot of people really focus on. But I love the way that you sort of broke out the book with different chapters focusing on different types of disease, so you can see, where it impacts people's lives.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do think like a lot of people sometimes are looking for a way to eat to lose weight, because we do, obviously this country, we have 70% of people are overweight or obese, but so many people have, like you said, like dealing with mental health issues or eating disorders or just other things. So there's just so many benefits to eating in a way that, aligns with human physiology.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to come back around now to the mental health stuff. So that chapter I thought was, I mean, man, there was stuff there that I really didn't know or didn't quite understand, and it really, really helped me. And, it's interesting. I do get messages from people all the time, like trying to convince family members or friends who suffer from depression to try this, and you didn't really have the language to explain why this really does seem to work for people for depression, and for mood disorders. But this chapter really gave me a lot of information. So can you start first by explaining like what insulin resistance in the brain is, and and how that works? Because and how you could have that and have your body not show like diabetes or anything.
Absolutely. And I will definitely disclaim that I'm I'm not the expert on this, but when I heard Chris Palmer speaks. Chris Palmer is a psychiatrist, and he's right now in the process of trying to fund a ketogenic trial for mental health. So I'm just so passionate about his work. And when I first heard him speak and he talked about these different research studies, I was fascinated, because this was not something I was ever taught in dietetics. I was never taught that you could have insulin resistance in your brain. The brain utilized insulin. Like you said, like I didn't know what that meant. And just like you, my goal of going completely carnivore for 30 days was to heal my muscle pain. And when my lifelong anxiety was basically resolved, I was curious. Why? How did this happen? I'm grateful. Don't get me wrong. I'm grateful this happened. But what in the world? And how did this happen so quickly? I've been suffering for decades. And the more people I interviewed, this was a common theme. Like, yeah, my anxiety's better, my depression's better. Like nothing major in their life changed. It wasn't like, well, I won the lottery. No, it was like, I ate this way and things are better. And so I was like, I have to know. And so, I'm really, and like I shared earlier, my mom has bipolar disorder. Something was really challenging for me growing up with. So I wanted to know, because I thought like, if this is true, if this isn't a weird coincidence, this is going to completely shift the field of mental health, or it could. So insulin resistance in the brain, I think the best analogy is to think about it like babies with epilepsy, because here's the thing is we have studies that people with major depression, schizophrenia, with anxiety have two things. They have higher levels of glutamate in the brain. It's a neurotransmitter I'll talk a little bit about. And we actually know that they're having an increase in inflammation and oxidation. And how do we measure that? They actually are able to do brain scans, and they can see things like lactate levels, and other markers of inflammation are higher in the brain in people with these disorders. And for a long time, they didn't know why. They're like, okay, so we know this is happening, but why? Why is this happening? And then on the same token, okay, well, why, when people go on a low carb diet, why are they getting better? And so one of the main theories behind this is just like, babies with, or people with epilepsy. Epilepsy is a seizure disorder. And so, infants get epilepsy, toddlers get epilepsy. And it's not because they have a bad diet. It's not like, someone was spiking the mom's breast milk with, high fructose corn syrup. They were simply born with a metabolic.
Although that could have been happening.
Yeah, you never know if they're using like Nestle or something. But anyway, that could have been that.
Yeah.
But what was happening basically is they have a metabolic error where when they take in those carbohydrates, they have a metabolic error in the brain. They cannot utilize and absorb that glucose. They have an insulin, some type of resistance. So what happens? They have a seizure. Well, how do you fix it? You put them on a ketogenic diet. In many, many cases, we have tons of studies on this. They stop having seizures. And so, Chris Palmer actually said, he just was telling me about this study where they followed young people that actually had a higher level of just insulin in the body. And they ended up having higher rates of bipolar disorder, like later on in life. But even if you don't have any signs, because here's what happens a lot. And I saw this a lot. I worked in 2 different psychiatric units as a lead dietitian. People will get a slew of blood tests done, people with like major depression or anxiety, and everything comes back normal. And it's like, oh no, like, okay, so, and then a doctor will say like, all right, we're going to put you on an antidepressant, an antipsychotic. We're going to have you do this, cognitive behavioral therapy. And I say in the book too, like, I am all about coping mechanisms. Like, I think therapy and mental, I think that is good and that is essential and that is important. But if we're not getting to the underlying cause, that's a big problem. So, babies with epilepsy are born with a metabolic error. What if people with major depression, bipolar disorder, and major anxiety, and even OCD disorder, what if it's just simply a metabolic error in the brain? You can't absorb and utilize glucose, carbohydrates. Because what happens, you remove those carbohydrates and all of a sudden people are getting significantly better. And the thing is, we definitely have, like I said, the research studies, and I cite these in the book, that there's something going on in the brain. We can measure that things, levels of ATP are different and that lactate levels are higher with carbohydrates, but we don't have the science yet to make it a standard practice, and that's why Chris Palmer is trying to fund these trials. But I just find it fascinating.
So it could be a lot of people have this intolerance or have a problem, even if it's not super extreme, like to the point of causing epilepsy. A lot of people could have like really an intolerance. So what does that mean though, insulin resistance? So does that mean that like in your muscles, your brain can't take any more sugar? So
your brain can't, your brain can't do, the brain is so incredible and complex. And we're actually finding out that insulin in the brain has other functions than just for communicating with the centers of the brain. But if you have insulin resistance in the brain, what they're, proposing is happening is just certain systems of your brain, certain parts of your brain are not able to function. And that shows up differently for different people. For some people, that can show up as seriously as you're having hallucinations, like schizophrenia. For some people, you may not ever know that you're full. You may constantly feel hungry. For some people, you might feel overwhelmed and panicked. For some people, you might feel like a general malaise and sadness all the time, and you don't know why. There's nothing you can do about it. So it's like, basically, it's not allowing your brain to function properly. And unfortunately, it just depends. It depends on the person, someone, and we don't know this, but it would be my hypothesis that certainly, some people may have it very mildly. Some people obviously have it extreme where they have like the hallucinations. But it makes sense that if this is a possibility, in such a simple solution to put you on a low carb diet, to see like, hey, let's give this 30 days. Let's see, because if it's true and if an individual generally has depression or a major mental illness and it's caused by insulin resistance in the brain, we don't have good tests for that yet. We can't test that. Like I said, you can run every test in the body. And I think this is one thing that's caused many people to feel hopeless is you run every test in the body and everything comes back fine. So you give yourself 30 days and you'll have your answers. I had my answer in 3 weeks that, oh my God,
So just to understand then, so when you're insulin resistant, that means, your cells don't respond to the message that insulin is sending.
Yes, exactly.
And
it's not able to go where it needs to.
Right. And you can have that all over your body, or it can be in different places. Like not every cell in your body becomes insulin resistant at the same time. So you'll have some cells that are still responding and others that are not. And so insulin's resistance in the brain is where the cells in the brain have stopped responding to insulin, regardless of what might be happening in other parts of your body.
Exactly. Thank you. You broke that down much better than I think I just did. Yeah. And so, and when they're not, and when the cells aren't utilizing, that glucose in the brain, right, it's,
so that, and then the differences in the disease could be like if the cells that are responsible for being able to tell the difference between what you see and what you think you see, like then that can result in hallucinations or schizophrenia.
Absolutely.
I even read once that timing, I don't know, there's a part of the brain that deals with timing. And so people can think that they're hearing God speak, but really it's their own thought. They lost the sense of which, when they heard it and when they thought it,
Yeah.
So I mean, I would make sense that there are certain cells that, are responsible for different things that then become damaged and make different things happen in your the way you experience the world. So then where does glutamate fall within that? So glutamate is a neurotransmitter that
glutamate is a neurotransmitter. Yeah. And so neurotransmitters, like most people, when they think of neurotransmitters, they really just think of dopamine and serotonin. Those are kind of especially dopamine as our feel good. But I was really surprised because I think it would be my hypothesis that those are probably the two big things happening with mental illness. One is that potential for insulin resistance in the brain. And then the other one is, and this is something that was never taught to me as a dietitian. When you're consuming a lot of processed carbohydrates, when you're consuming a lot of breads and sugars and granola bars and this happens with seed oils too, canola oils and refined oils. What happens is it actually shifts the neurotransmitters in your brain. Like when you're eating an animal-based diet, you have two different neurotransmitters. There's this pathway, glutamate and GABA. We'll just talk about glutamate specifically. Glutamate, your brain wants to keep that really level. So when you're eating, animal-based, it's level, everything is fine. But when you eat a lot of those processed carbohydrates and seed oil, it's kind of like a pedal to the metal. Glutamate goes through the roof. Your brain produces a ton more of the neurotransmitter glutamate. And at the same time, you're also getting a hit of dopamine. So dopamine makes you feel really good. I ate all this sugar, I feel so good. But glutamate goes really, really high. And when glutamate goes really high, it actually affects brain-derived neurotropic factor, which what that does, this is a long way of saying when glutamate goes too high, it basically prevents your brain from being able to cope with stress. Your brain can no longer change and mold and take in new information. And so I can't think of a more important time in recent history with the pandemic and everything to be able to cope with stress. And most people listening to this might say oh my gosh, I have family or friends or, kids that just can't cope with basic life stress. They just crumble. And even if this is another thing, an addiction recovery. What if you're doing all this work and all this, trying to learn new coping mechanisms, but you're eating a highly processed diet? Your brain may not be able to cope with stress. Your brain may not be able to, process that new information, kind of in one ear, out the other. So it just is really fascinating to me that, food processors, food manufacturers, they're producing these foods that give you this hit, does make you feel really good with this dopamine, but at the same time are basically going to prevent you from, healing, coping with stress and moving on with your life. So, and then of course, I'm sure you read in the chapter too, that what are we feeding our psychiatric patients? It's just a crime, up to 42 grams of sugar every single day. It's a lose-lose battle there. It's really, really unfortunate.
Yeah. Now, the other thing I didn't really understand is inflammation and oxidation in the brain. So, I've started to hear people say that depression is, caused by inflammation, and that's why a keto diet can be really helpful and a carnivore diet can be helpful. So, but what does that mean? How can your brain get inflamed? I thought if it gets inflamed, it presses against your skull and bad things happen. What does that mean?
Well, I imagine like if you have a major trauma, you like hit your head, get a concussion. Like there's different types of swelling, right? Like when we're talking about inflammation, we're talking about like on a cellular level. So this is not like, the physical swelling and like, you get all this pressure, like you're gonna have a like I said, a concussion. This is they can actually measure inside cells. They can measure there's damage of the very, very cell. Like, why is this cell, why are the lactate levels really high? Why is this cell, why is this cell showing inflammation? So that's kind of what's going on. And that goes back to that insulin resistance,
So wait, I'm sorry. So in that context, inflammation doesn't mean something has swelled to very big. It just means that there's damage. Is that right?
Damage, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So when we think about inflamed, like I think about like a bruise or if you bump your knee and it gets like bigger, but that's not exactly what we mean when we say inflammation in the cells.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. And that's actually something I should make sure that I clarify is we're just talking about damage.
Okay. But that is actually really huge because the word damage, like that means something to me. Inflamed, it's kind of like, well, get some ice, put your knee up, take some Advil. But damaged is a different story.
Yeah, true. And I feel like the most encouraging news though is in most cases, so much of our chronic illnesses are, I don't want to say always reversible because they certainly aren't always reversible. Many times they are, but they can be at least alleviated and improved, that like the body wants to heal. We just have to stop causing damage.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I find interesting about, what you're talking about here is that, sugar can really be damaging separate and apart from weight. I feel like it's easier to talk to someone who struggles with weight about changing their diet because they're already sort of thinking about weight. But for like most of my father's side of the family, like very few of them have really been obese or over the years have maybe gained 15, 20 pounds, but so they're just not used to thinking about food. So to talk about this is hard, but it's important seeing this chapter. It makes it clear that you can have a very real, very physiological response to sugar that doesn't manifest in weight.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people who deal with anxiety, depression, certainly even eating disorders are either normal weight or underweight. And so I think recognizing the effects specifically of those very processed carbohydrates, sugar, high fructose corn syrup. I have, through most of my life, certainly my adulthood and adolescence as an athlete, was very lean, but was massively depressed, having anxiety, and then was having symptoms of hypoglycemia. And if you just looked at me, it would have been like, wow, that's a fit runner, but it's like, my gosh, there was so much damage being done in my body by all the, sugar and processed carbohydrates I was eating. So it's hard. It's hard if people aren't suffering. Often people don't want to hear it or don't want to change. It's people like sugar. I've had dietitians tell me like, oh, it's mean to suggest people give up sugar or carbs, and to me, it's restrictive. That's something you get a lot. And to me, getting your life back and your health back and living a vibrant life is anything but restrictive.
Yeah. Well, let's dive right into that. I've done a couple of episodes about sugar addiction and about, pulling sugar out of the diet and the difficulties. So, I openly admit that I believe I am a sugar addict, meaning that my brain chemistry changes when I eat it. And, it's not just like, oh my God, I love this stuff so much. I'm such a chocoholic, like you say, but it's like, literally something's happening in my brain and my body. And once I finally accepted and understood that and removed it from my diet, I found so much more food freedom than I've ever had. And so I do try to bring that message to people. And, but I also try to be, in my community, in my Black Carnivore community, at least, be understanding that not everybody has a sugar addiction. And some
Yeah.
people have been have gained weight and have been, perhaps very heavy without having that brain thing that goes on with sugar. So, so it's a little bit personalized. Some people, are able to get away with it, and, but not me.
Yeah, so we know that some people tolerate carbohydrates significantly better than others, and why that is, I'm sure there's, bio-individuality, some genetic predispositions. Like you said, some people are able to eat carbohydrates or even sugar just fine. I know for myself, as an athlete, I do consume some carbohydrates. I have some, slow burning carbs in my diet. But if I have like a sugary dessert or something, it's not good. It sets off a pretty bad reaction for me. When I say reaction, I mean just my mental health. I immediately feel anxious. I feel dizzy. I know for myself that's not a good thing, and it's also, it's hard to stop. Our bodies don't have, even if you don't have a sugar or carbohydrate addiction, certainly on a physiological, just, note, it's high. We don't have good mechanisms to stop eating carbohydrates. Most people can easily eat a bag of chips or a whole thing of cookies, where you certainly wouldn't, eat 2 or 3 huge steaks. So yeah, I like to talk about that and to validate that, because I think most people feel embarrassed. Like, oh, I ate a whole cake, right? A whole thing of ice cream, where it's just like, yeah, it's not your fault. You've just been given bad information about what humans are supposed to eat. I think the concept of moderation is complete garbage. It's injurious at best, and it's unethical and corporate driven at worst. It's not, nobody knows what moderation means. The human body cannot moderate processed carbohydrates well. And I think it's caused more confusion and really prevented us from getting the low carb message out there.
Yeah. So what I hear from you is that, these highly processed foods that have a lot of sugar and carbohydrate in them, they actually trigger our brain to produce more glutamate, flooding our brain with 100 times more than it needs.
Up to 100 times more, yeah.
Yeah. And so then that glutamate sits in the brain, is causing damage at the cellular level, damage that perhaps is causing some of the, the mental disease that we're seeing from anxiety, depression, OCD, maybe schizophrenia, and so on. And so it's, eating these foods, which are also releasing dopamine, so also triggering the brain to feel good, excited, and learn that these are good foods to turn to. I mean, that's sort of stunning to me. Like, that seems incredibly dangerous to let that kind of food out there and nobody speak up about that. Like, to teach your body, I mean, to have something send the signals to your body that this is both good and forget about this bad thing that's happening is huge. And I feel kind of angry that, like, is this information out there? How long have people been able to see some of these things? How long have people been drawing these connections? And how is this information, like, hidden from the public?
Yeah, we regulate things that are dangerous in this country. A lot of things, like, if you want to get cocaine, you can't go to 7-Eleven. We know that that'll change your brain chemistry. Even things like cigarettes and alcohol, we say you have to be a certain age, and most people know the potential ramifications of things like that. But, you can be 7 or 8 years old and go get candy bars and Coca-Cola, and, even you can use your food stamps to get Cheetos. Food manufacturers and food processors know this. I mean, this information has been around for a minute. Like, some of the studies on potential addiction are a bit newer, but, as soon as it was discovered that, you got that dopamine release in the brain. We talk about in the book, The Bliss Point. There's people it's their full-time job to find, how high I can spike your dopamine. How can I get your taste receptors? Like somebody's full-time job is to develop, like if you're developing coffee creamer per se, I got to make sure that French vanilla is just sweet enough that you want to keep coming back. Maybe a tiny bit of salt. Can't be too sweet or you're like, ugh, can't be not sweet enough. And, they test this. They test people's like neuroscience. They're doing brain scans on people while doing this, food scientists. Food manufacturers are literally have people whose full-time job is to see how I can get you addicted. And it's to me, I agree. It's kind of infuriating. Like, and we don't talk about it. If anything, it's almost more like a joke. Like you were saying, like, oh, I'm a chocoholic, ha 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 ha. Where in reality, I think people need to be very aware that, like, hey, you know what? If you're going to use this stuff, you need to be aware of the consequences. Once again, if you're an adult and you have capacity, you can do whatever you like. But I think people need to be aware that this is potentially very dangerous.
And, I think that it is really important that you bring up, like, especially the time that we're in, during the pandemic. Like, I have so many, supporters, followers, and clients even that I coach who are, they're in stressful jobs, or they have, terrible bosses, or just this whole process of moving to, doing work remotely has been hard for a lot of people. And so, I hear from people who are just really stressed out and also, insecure about how long they're going to have a job. So it's really bad for people. And so to think that, so many of them have been like, oh, I was so stressed and, upset and blah, blah, blah. So I ate all these donuts. And to know that, those donuts is making it, 100 times harder for them to be able to manage the stress of whatever is happening around them is, that's like, that is groundbreaking information. And I don't think that people really get that. I do try to say it, but it's like, people are sort of focused on the good feeling that the food gives, but it's like, it's actually giving you 10 and taking 100 each bite. And so you're coming out at a net loss. I mean, and a lot net loss at the end of it. So, at some point, like, you're never gonna win. It's like, a gambler's gambling game. Like, you're never gonna break even. So you just have to quit.
Really, I mean, this is why we need effective coping mechanisms. I encourage anybody to, and it, obviously it's a bit beyond the scope of this book, but we do talk about, like, making sure that, you develop some really strong emotional management skills away from food, because that's a really good point. When you eat a lot of processed food or, high sugary, high fructose corn syrup food to deal with stress, yes, you will feel better. Like you said, you get 10, but you're going to give 100 back. So you have to, I shouldn't say you have to, ideally, I believe it's best to continue to feel yourself. Because yeah, you're right. We all have super stressful stuff. I lost all my dietitian hours and it was just this crazy wild last year. Right. But, buy into self-care, buy into taking care of yourself. You want to get through this. You want to make it through your job. You want to, whatever you're doing, the best thing you can possibly do is to continue to fuel your body in your brain in a way that's going to allow you to be a functioning adult, and that does. It's really hard to retrain your brain to utilize new coping skills, because you know what? Journaling isn't going to make you feel great, maybe as donuts would, or going for a walk or taking a bubble bath. Like, it doesn't give you that dopamine and that sugar high. But once again, I'm glad you brought up the point that food manufacturers they know that. They're counting on you getting that dopamine high and that dopamine crash and then coming back. So
that makes me think of, like, the cigarette manufacturers. I mean, they knew this information a long time before, they shared it with the public, and they were designing their product based off of these addictive patterns that they knew. And it's like, now I get it, because this is something that Joan Eifland has talked about, that the snack industry has many of their executives came from the tobacco industry.
Yeah.
So they brought the same thinking, the same battle plan, and the same strategy into snack food, and are using our biology against us, actually.
Absolutely. And guess what else they're doing? They're buying the health professionals, the Academy of Nutrition, which is the governing board of all dietitians, which designs my education, all dietitians' education. They are highly sponsored. Number one sponsors, PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, General Mills, Kellogg's. So they know what they're doing, and it's not for health. I really hope that nobody is naive enough to think that all these big organizations are just looking out for us, right? But it is disheartening, and it's hard to hear that, like, oh my gosh, our health professionals are sponsored by Kellogg's. Like, yeah, unfortunately, so much in this world comes down to money. So you really have to take a step back and critically think and say, like, well, does it make sense that, Frosted Flakes is part of a complete breakfast? That's silly. It doesn't make sense that I should eat sugar and corn first thing in the morning. It's, I get really fired up about it.
My relationship to the grocery store has changed so much going carnivore, because now there's really no reason for me to walk around the grocery store. Like, I go to the meat counter, where the dairy and the butter is, and maybe if there's a fish counter, and then the cleaning aisle for soaps and whatnot. But there's nothing in the rest of it. So it's how I even shop, how I engage at the store has really changed. And I feel like I don't know about all the new foods that are out there.
I feel like that's so great. That's like part of food freedom for me. I used to just obsess, like, oh, I got this oatmeal. What about this granola bar, that granola bar? It's so nice to let go. And I almost feel silly, when I'm in the produce. And I do, like I said, I eat some carbohydrates. I tolerate carrots. I eat some berries. But it was funny. I was in the produce aisle the other day and actually saw someone I knew. And I was like, well, this is for a tortoise. Like, I felt like I had to let him know, because I was getting these vegetables. We have a tortoise that she has to have leafy greens. But I was getting all these leafy greens. And I was like, that's not for me. But you're right. Like, human nutrition, I feel like so many people would eat probably a lot less produce if they knew, like, hey, that's really, you can't get a whole lot of nutrition, bioavailable, meaning the human body can use it, out of this produce. Where if you just invest your money in these animal products, the amount of B12, zinc, folate, all the different amino acids, and creatine, carnitine, like, this is what's going to fuel your body and brain. And it's also not going to cause you to feel gassy and bloated and exhausted. I hate that we've normalized that too. I mean, we could go on and on about that, but people just think it's normal to feel achy and gassy and bloated. That's not normal.
I know. And I feel like it's only sort of recently that people have been speaking about it more outspoken. So when I grew up and I was trying to eat a vegetarian diet, like, I felt like that all the time. And I was just like, I kept it quiet, I didn't say anything. I was super embarrassed. And I was like, oh, why can't I make this work? And now to discover everybody was feeling that way and continues to feel that way, and are amazed that I don't feel that way and kind of think that I'm lying. It's like, wow, they really have done a number on our heads.
They have. I tell you, when we were going to, for the race, we were at the airport, we were going for my ultra in November. I was wearing my Eat Meat shirt, Eat Meat Repeat, and it just had the animals on it. And when I went through security, the woman looked at me and she said, wow, you don't look like you eat meat. And I said, ma'am, that's all I eat. In her mind, someone who eats meat was probably obese, or it's like we've associated meat with being bad, and we've associated like grains and all this with being good. We have it so backwards. The indoctrination is just it's everywhere. And so it's going to take a while, and it's going to take, and I think, like you said so beautifully earlier, I think it takes more than the science, because I think sometimes people they don't even care. It kind of goes over your head. It takes the stories, it takes the sharing, it takes connecting, it takes seeing someone go from maybe being really sick to healthy, to really get people inspired. So, that's why I do this. That's why I continue to come out and speak, because I believe in this. I want change. And I was so tired of being involved in a system that just wasn't working, you know?
Yeah. Well, so I want to dive right into your explanation of how to get started on this. But before we do, I wanted to point out to the listeners the sentence that I found most profound in the book. So it was page 57. This means an individual with chronic debilitating depression due to insulin resistance in the brain can go to their doctor have a slew of medical tests run, and everything may come back in the normal range. That just kind of changed everything for me, because there's so many people that I know who suffer from depression and just, but they're slim. So it's just like, you and this keto thing, whatever. And that I can take to the bank.
Yeah. And I wish everyone that had depression had a lab that was like crazy out of whack and eating the keto diet, put it back in. But it's not that way. But I do think people, like, hopefully when you hear that, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm massively depressed and I went to my doctor and nothing was wrong. And then people get antidepressants. And one thing that we know is statistically really sad is antidepressants and antipsychotics don't work for everybody. So here's this person that could potentially really benefit from a high fat, low carb diet, who now is on all these medications and just thinks, well, I guess this is my lot in life. I'm always going to be depressed and have a shitty quality of life. And that's just not true. So yeah, and thank you for pointing that out. And once again, it's so simple. I hope in 50, 100 years, maybe it'll take longer. It's going to be a standard of practice that everyone who comes in with depression, we're going to say, okay, let's start you on this low carb diet. But you don't have to wait. I didn't want to wait. You don't want to wait, So yeah, getting started, I think it really depends on the person, but I think it is so beneficial to really go full carnivore as you can, at least for 30 days, and it depends. And so certainly if somebody's main goal is like they need to gain weight or they're super underweight, and I'm not a doctor, make sure you talk to, your healthcare provider. Perhaps that's not the best thing for you. Most people who are going to come to this way of eating are either at a normal weight, potentially a little overweight. So for me, going full carnivore for 30 days, really, I think, one, I got so much protein, but it also allowed my body to heal. Like, I had been taking in so many plants that there are things I didn't even know I was intolerant of, and so I just, I said, I have a video coming out tomorrow. I said, make it first. You want to get sold, before you start, tell somebody, talk to somebody, write it down. Why do you want to do this? Are you tired of feeling sad? Are you obese? Do you want to walk your daughter down the aisle? Are you tired of exercising for 20 hours a day and not losing weight? Like, why do you want to do this? Get sold. Then make it simple. You don't have to go. And we are so fortunate. We have a farmer not too far from us, but we also supplement with, beef from the store, bacon. What do you like? If you don't like beef, I think ruminant animals are important. Get lamb. If you don't like lamb, try bison, try elk, try some other stuff. If you love salmon, eat salmon. You like cod, don't make it overly complicated. Eggs, cheese, whatever. And then you have, I try not to use like you always or have to, but ideally you're going to commit to the process, give yourself 30 days and be prepared. Those first couple of weeks can be a little rough. You may have some headaches. I think supplementing with electrolytes is very important. And certainly if you are taking insulin or any other psychiatric medication, you really need your doctor to help you titrate those down. So before you start this, go check in with somebody. But yeah, especially if you're just pre-diabetic, you're not on any medication. I was floored.
And why would they need to titrate down? Do they, is there a negative to being over-medicated with those diabetes?
Absolutely. What can happen if you're taking insulin and you're not eating carbohydrates, you can get really low blood sugar. So you definitely don't want to have really low blood sugar. You don't want to have an episode certainly where you pass out or, you feel dizzy and sick and nauseated. But, we know that you, even on very, very, if you're taking incredibly high amounts of insulin, you can titrate down within, a week or two. So that's something that a doctor can help you with. We have actually, talking to Dr. Westman, they were actually able to, people who were ready to stop, they could just completely take them off insulin in most cases. And then if you're on any psychiatric medications, those can actually affect electrolytes. So that's just, this, when you're switching to a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet, you're going to have some shifts in electrolytes. And it's, long-term, it's completely healthy, but it can certainly mess with some medications. So it's just makes sense to sit down with your doctor and say, this is what I'm going to do. Let's work it out, and if you're, if a parent of somebody, sit down and say, how can we do this and work it out? And yeah, to me, someone told me that, oh, that's such a huge barrier. I'm like, oh my gosh, sitting down with your doctor once should not be a huge barrier, but yeah, those would be the two instances. If you're using insulin or if you're taking psychiatric medication, I would definitely encourage you to talk to your doctor. Just because you are going to have some shifts in electrolytes. But yeah, that's what I did. I mean, I had a ton of beef and butter for the first week, lots of salt.
Well, you talked about different tiers. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So in the book, we divide it into kind of like a 3-tier approach because, some people get really scared at the idea of like, oh, I could never give up plants, or I love my salad. So there's this carnivore tier, there's a keto, kind of keto carnivore tier. And then the last tier I call the animal-based build out. And so I say too, there's no prizes. It's not like, whoa, if you're in the carnivore tier, you win. And if you're in the animal-based build out, you lose. These are all of these tiers, I think, can be incredibly healthy, can give you a robust quality of life. So usually like deciding kind of what tier you want to start in or you need to start in, I would say one, like your motivation and your goals. For me, initially, I was in so much pain and I wasn't running and I was at a normal weight. So it made sense to start in that tier 1, because when you're doing just a carnivore diet, that's also going to help with any inflammation. We're taking out all the plants. So any potential autoimmune reactions I could have, tier 2 is still going to be very low carb and keto, but then you open it up a little bit more. So you have a little more flexibility. So, okay, well, maybe I can have some nuts, or maybe I know I tolerate broccoli just fine. So I'm going to have some broccoli. And then some people are just whizzes in the kitchen. If you watch my channel, that is not me. That is my wife. But they want to create like some keto fun recipes. And there's tons, you guys, keto carnivore recipes online. And that kind of keto tier gives you a little bit more flexibility. And then the animal-based build out, if you're someone who really needs to gain weight, in the hospital setting, people that are really underweight with either eating disorders, potentially going through chemotherapy, burn victims, someone who's trying to gain weight for sports. When I'm training really heavily for my endurance running, I call it the animal-based build out. So you start with that foundation. That foundation never changes. We're going to have meat and fat, but then you add more carbohydrates per tolerance. And me personally, I tolerate some long fermented sourdough really well. Yeah. And, we now know, talking with Dr. Eric Westman, some people, they tolerate up to 100 and 150 grams of carbs a day just fine. Most people do much better with a little bit less. Some people do better with none. But I wanted to definitely give people kind of options and kind of to think about like, okay, where am I starting with? Like, oh, I'm super sick. I feel awful. I have all these digestive problems. Let's just go back to the very beginning. It's like, I'm actually kind of fine, but I feel like I'm just low energy. I'm not eating very well. Maybe we start with the more keto. Or it's, I really need to gain weight. I'm really underweight. Maybe I start with this foundation of animal-based foods, and then I also add some supplemental foods or some long fermented sourdough or some of those more starchy foods that I tolerate. So.
Wow, that's awesome. I kind of try to take that approach as well, giving people, a range between very strict and more relaxed. And I think that helps, especially when people feel, this diet, it just requires so much re-education and undoing of just bad information. So it's really hard for people, really hard. And I think in that first, it maybe even takes longer than 30 days for people to kind of wrap their heads around this.
Yeah, I would say, now that I've been, mostly, certainly animal-based since November of 2019, you're right. I think 30 days, giving myself, I'm going to at least do 30 days kind of like set the bar to where it's like, okay, if this is tough in a week, because I get so concerned that people just, oh, the first time I feel bad, I want to, I got a headache, this is terrible. It's like, no, it's okay, hang in there. But yeah, most people are going to feel significantly better. And I've heard certainly with like, mental health, some people it's right away, but it can take, 2, 3, 6 months to really start to kind of unwind some of those, more serious physical ailments. And like you said, just kind of like relearning how to eat. We're not taught how to eat correctly as humans, or grew up eating cereals and fast foods and all this stuff. So really kind of, being able to get more in tune with your body and to really kind of buy in, I think is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to that end, I am actually launching, and I haven't yet put it out there, but by the time this video is out, it should be, that I'm creating a Carnivore Bootcamp. And this is really, so this is really a way to have a small group of people, 3 to 6 people come together and, just commit to doing this for 30 days, sharing their pictures of their food and, sharing their goals and their aspirations and their successes, and just have a little pod of people who provide that support for 30 days so that, they can get through that initial hurdle. And I'm hoping that'll help, because I definitely see a need for a lot of hand holding, and, and that comes better in a group, I think. I mean, it's nice to have one person who's like really focused on you, but it really comes better in a group.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I'm excited to get that started, because I want to see more people like start this and do it. And so many people at home have family members who are like pushing back or, harassing them, yet eating their beef. I do always tell people, as much beef as you think you need to buy, you need to double that, because everybody else in your household is going to eat it.
Yep,
So yeah. And, it's kind of frustrating. Like, I mean, to me, it's the utmost of crazy that, like, our body communicates what it wants to us by our likes and dislikes. And so when we go crazy over fatty beef, like, that should be a clear sign that something our body wants. But we have been taught not to trust the signals our body sends us. And then we also have this crazy sugar thing happening that, also hijacks our brains. So we just don't trust the signals that our brains are sending us. And that's criminal. I mean, how else will we provide what our body needs if we're not going to listen to what it's telling us?
Yeah, you're 100% right. Like, we should, and we can just eat to satiation when we're eating fatty meats and we're eating, things we crave, things we enjoy, those, meat, salt, fat. And we did for the human evolution, and we had almost pretty much, as far as we know, 0 incidence of chronic disease. People's bones were strong, they were tall. It wasn't until the agricultural revolution that we started having lots of problems. And we see this even in certain cultures, like the Inuit Eskimos that eat, just meat and fat. They're really, really healthy. And then, we come in and give them these processed foods and they start having heart disease, so yeah, I hear you. And I also real quick to the point of, if you're living with somebody and they're pushing back and they don't like this, it's hard. It can be really hard, you guys. Change is hard. And, sometimes when we see people around us changing, even the people who love you most, it's kind of a strange paradox, will often try to discourage you. Change is inherently unsafe, even if it's good. So, I would encourage anybody to keep going, do the best you can to continue to move forward. And when the people in your life see these positive changes after a while, I mean, it's kind of what happened in my relationship. I was like, okay, so I'm not sure if I like this yet, but your anxiety is really good. And then it was like, okay, now I like this because I want your energy. I want your vitality. So yeah, just don't be easily discouraged. Keep on going.
Yeah, that was a really poignant story that you told about, your wife being really opposed to your trying this. And then after a few weeks, seeing how well you were doing. Do you mind sharing that?
Oh yeah. So, when I decided, first I just decided I was going to follow a ketogenic diet because I was like, well, I'm not running anymore. And then I discovered, I came across Zach Bitter, who's a low carbohydrate athlete, and I was just fascinated. And then I saw, Sean Baker, and I was like, oh my gosh, this all meat diet. And I was just like, that's crazy. I don't know. But the more I researched and thought about it, it made sense to me. I was like, oh my God, this could be how humans are supposed to eat. And my only goal, like I said, was just to decrease my muscle pain. But I have a history of an eating disorder, and I've had, lots of not like full on back to treatment relapses, but lots of struggles throughout my adulthood. And so when I told my wife, I'm like, all right, so I'm just going to do this for 30 days. I'm going to follow this all meat diet. She was not having it. It was like, this is eating disordered. We argued about it. She actually started crying, and I felt terrible. And, finally she just said like, all right, well, you're an adult, do whatever you want. This won't work. You're going to quit. And I can't even describe exactly why. I was just sold. I was like, I don't know why, but this feels right. And, I noticed after about a week, my energy and stuff improved. But it was on that third week that she asked me, she said, hey, Shell, will you come sit down with me? And I went over and, took her hand, and she's like, I don't know if I like this yet, this all meat diet thing, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. And we both were just like, what is going on here? And then there was a moment a few months into it, I was starting to feel stronger, and I, by that time, was running. I made a comment. I was like, yeah, it's, I don't even really mind if I gain weight. I just love how I feel. And she was like, who are you? like, what? Like, cause I so much of my life just focused on leanness and fitness. And it was genuine. Like, I just kind of said it like, oh yeah, I'm good. Like, whatever. And I wasn't weighing myself. I wasn't weighing my food. And, obviously reading the book, everything was getting so much better. But it's really fascinating, and I do think the best testimony we can give is our own, and there's a saying, your test is your testimony, your mess is your message. Like, people are going to want what you have. If you are struggling with obesity and depression or whatever, and you start getting better, people are going to want to know why. And, I feel like we have this, it's simple. I guess, yeah, it's simple and it's not easy, right? Like eating meat and fat, it's pretty simple, but there's so many complexities that go into what we eat and why we eat. And it's, but I found just like anything else, it's time on task. The more I do it, the easier it is, the better I feel. I get to eat amazing, delicious tasting food every day. I have this beautiful life where I get to run. I just wrote a book. I'm, training for an ultra marathon, just doing all kinds of great stuff. So, I'd encourage anybody to just like, don't limit yourself. Possibilities are endless. When you get your energy back and your health back, like you might surprise yourself by what you can accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, those are amazing words to kind of wrap up with. Is there anything else you'd like to share with my audience? How would you sum up, your findings and what's next for you?
Yeah. Gosh, I feel like we did such a good talk. I'm sure there's so much more we could talk about, but, I would just say thank you. Like, I am so grateful. Like, I feel like this book is kind of my gift of gratitude back to the community. And I really hope that, if you guys read it, that you like it. If you have any questions, comments, things, please message me. It's kind of funny. People email me or message me and be like, I hate to bother you. And it's like, no, I want to know. Tell me about it. Ask me questions. I'm a truly kind of a nerd at heart. So I can science geek out. I can troubleshoot with you. And what is next? Last summer through fall, I worked at, a company called Scratch Meat. So I'll be heading back there in April. It's kind of seasonal, and I'm training, for a 12-hour race. The goal is to win and to break the course record, to run 80 miles in 12 hours.
Wow.
Even saying that, yeah, dang, that still sounds crazy. We'll see. So we're, and I'm just open to new opportunities. I've just been so blessed lately to be invited on some podcasts and some seminars and things. And so I'm just
I saw you with Ken Berry. Oh my God, like the rock star, the
Carnivore Isn't that cool? He messaged me on Twitter and he was like, hey, would you like to do a YouTube live? And I was like, oh yeah. I was like, hey man, can I send you my book? And he's like, well, I read your book. That's why I'm asking you. I'm like, all right, cool. Yeah. So, no, he was fantastic. So I'm just once again, I'm so grateful. So I'm staying open, and yeah, I mean, please, you follow me on Instagram and, YouTube and stuff. And I'm going to try to keep pumping out some content, but if anything else wild comes up, I'll throw it out there.
Okay. Awesome. Well, everybody who's listening, you heard it from Michelle. We just talked about a lot of really great things today, and I really hope that you take this information to heart. There was a lot of new stuff. There is a lot of new stuff in the book that you might not have heard spoken about or written about in this way. There's a lot of great scientific information. So if your family's giving you a hard time, you can say, okay, let's turn to page 184, and here is the reason why, I'm doing this and why you need to back off. So I definitely encourage you to use the book that way. But if that's not what you're looking for, there's a lot of personality and personable stuff in there. There are real people who have had real amazing success on this way of eating, and will really, they're just having a great time. And I encourage you to get the book, read the book, and contact Michelle. And you can find her at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat on Instagram.
Yes,
right?
so Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. And then I have a website now, thedietitiansdilemma.net, and on Twitter at Michelle Hurn RD.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, thanks so much. And everybody, I will see you next week. I had a great time today. All right.